Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah shiur. We are holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav, and we'll be learning today Mirz Hashem Daf Tzadik Aleph Amid Aleph. And we are continuing a fascinating topic that we began in the last shiur, and that is the case of the Mishnah in Sukkah Daf Yud Amid Aleph of Peres Aleh Sadin. If you spread a sheet over the sukkah, and by that we mean if you spread a sheet either above the schach or under the schach, the sheet itself is not kosher for schach. The sheet is something which is royal lekabel tuma. If it's a woven piece of fabric, it's a davar ha'orug, so it's royal lekabel tuma, and it's not kosher for use as schach. So you took this sheet, which is pasal as schach, and you spread it out either above or under the schach of your sukkah. What's the halacha? And in the last shiur, we began Sif Yud Tes, and in the beginning of Sif Yud Tes, the Mechaber presented to us what is really the Shita of Rashi. So now let's remind ourselves. The Mishnah in Sukkah gives us what seems to be two cases. The Mishnah in Sukkah says, Piras aleh sadin mipnei achama. If you took a sheet and you spread it above the Sukkah to protect yourself from the sun, oy tachtea mipnei hanishar, or you spread it out perhaps under the Sukkah to catch, under the schach, to catch leaves or other things that might be falling through the sukkah. So in that case, the Mishnah in Sukkah tells us that the sukkah is pasal. On the other hand, if the reason for the sheet is for noi sukkah, if the sheet is beautifying the sukkah, then we said the sukkah is kosher. Now, in this day of Rishona that we learned in the last shiur, the Shita of Rashi, the way Rashi understands the Mishnah is very simple. Rashi understands the Mishnah, if you took a sheet and you put it on top of the sukkah to protect yourself from the sun, or the second case of the Mishnah is, if you spread a sheet underneath the schach to protect yourself from things that are falling through the schach. In both of those cases, the sukkah is pasal. Why is the sukkah pasal? Because in both of those cases, what you essentially did was you are mesachech your sukkah with schach pasal. Because why did you put this sheet up? You put this sheet up essentially l'shem tzeil. You put it up for shelter purposes. You put it up to protect yourself from the sun. That's l'shem tzeil. You put it up to protect you from things that are falling down. That's also a form of l'shem tzeil. You put it up l'shem shelter in order to protect you. You're sitting inside the sukkah. You want it to protect you from what's coming from above. In both of those cases, what you really did was you put up a sheet to act as schach, and this schach is schach pasal. So therefore the Mishnah says, in those cases, the sukkah would be a pasal sukkah. However, if you put up the sheet for noi sukkah, so you didn't put it up for shelter purposes, you put it up to beautify the sukkah, now the sukkah, according to Rashi, now the sukkah is kosher. Why is the sukkah kosher? So we learned in the Mishnah Berurah, back on Tzadik Amid Beis in Ois Katan Nun Gimel, the Mishnah Berurah told us the reason it's kosher is the kevan dehevi tzarich sukkah. Since you put up this sheet as noi sukkah, you put it up to beautify the sukkah, so you put it up not for schach, you put it up as an accessory to the sukkah, as an accessory to the schach, because essentially it's an accessory to the ceiling. So it's an accessory to the schach. Since it's an accessory to the schach, says the Mishnah Berurah over there in Nun Gimel, batel legaba. It's batel to the schach. We don't view it as a separate entity. We don't view it as schach pasal, that you're being mesachech with schach pasal. Rather, we look at it as a form of noi sukkah. It's batel to the schach, therefore we don't have to worry about it, and your sukkah is 100% kosher. And if you take a look in the Sharet Tzion Ois Katan Ayin Vav on Tzadik Amid Beis, he brings down this concept from the Mordechai. Now, the reason that that's significant is because there are really two different ways to understand the Shita of Rashi. And I'm bringing this up because it's going to be Negeya at the end of today's shiur. There's really two ways to understand Rashi. According to Rashi, one thing is very clear, and that is, if you put up the sheet for protection, if you put up the sheet l'shem tzeil, then the reason the sukkah is pasal is because essentially you put up the sheet as schach, and the sheet is schach pasal. If you put up schach pasal for schach purposes, then the sukkah is 100% pasal. The question is, why is the sukkah kosher if you put it up for noi sukkah? And over there we have two different ways of looking at it. One is the words of the Mordechai that the Mishnah Berurah brought down over here in Ois Katan Nun Gimel. And that is that if you put up the sheet for noi sukkah, then the sheet could be bottled to the schach because it's an accessory to the schach. That's one way to understand Rashi. But really, there's really another way that we could understand Rashi as well. And the truth is that Rashi himself on Daf Yud Amud Aleph seems to sound like the second way that I'm going to tell you now. And that is that it's not so much like the Mordechai says that if you put it up for noi sukkah, now since it's an accessory to the schach, it's bottle. Really, we don't have to go that far. Really, it could be that according to Rashi, the reason the sukkah is kosher if you put up the sheet for noi sukkah is simply that you did not put it up for schach purposes. Right? Remember, we said that according to Rashi, if you put up, why is the sukkah puzzle if you put it up to protect yourself from the sun? Because you put it up for schach purposes. Okay, if you put it up for noi sukkah, you did not put it up for schach purposes. Why did you put it up? So in the case of noi sukkah, you put it up for decorative purposes. But how about if you didn't put it up for decorative purposes? Let me give you another example. Let's say you had a large, maybe a drape. You took down your drapes. You figured that during sukkahs you're moving out to the sukkah, so you don't need your dining room drapes hanging in the dining room. Now's a very good time to wash the drapes. So you took down the drapes, you washed them. They're too big to fit in the dryer. You want to spread them out somewhere so they could dry in the sun. So you take the drapes and you spread them out on top of the sukkah. Beautiful, fantastic. You have a big surface on top of the sukkah. You spread out the drapes in order to dry them out. In that case, did you put up the drapes l'shem tzeil? No. You didn't put them up for schach purposes. Did you put them up as an accessory to the schach? No. You didn't put them up for noi sukkah. You put them up to dry the drapes. So here's where you're going to have a difference in how you understand Pshat and Rashi. According to the Mordechai, which, and the Mishnah Berurah seems to be going with that in Ois Katan Nun Gimel, according to the Mordechai, when is it okay to spread a sheet on top of the sukkah? You need two requirements. One is that you didn't put it up l'shem tzeil. You didn't put it up for schach purposes, but it also has to be bottled to the schach. And in order for it to be bottled to the schach, you have to have put it up as an accessory to the schach. So if you put it up for noi sukkah, it's an accessory to the schach. Now it's bottled to the schach, and the sukkah is kosher. But in our case of the drapes, you didn't put it up as an accessory to the schach. You put it up to dry it. Ooh. According to the Mordechai's understanding of Rashi, this sukkah would still be puzzle, because the drapes are not going to be bottled to the schach. According to the other understanding of Rashi, is there's only one requirement over here. If you put it up l'shem tzeil, it puzzles the schach. If you did not put it up l'shem tzeil, it doesn't puzzle the sukkah. Did I put up the drapes l'shem tzeil? No, so they don't puzzle the sukkah. So here you have the understanding of Rashi. Now we go to the bottom line in the Shulchan Aruch on Tzadik Amud Beis, where we're going to see the Deya Shniya, the second opinion brought down by the Mechaber, and this is really based on a Rabbeinu Tam. Says the Mechaber, V'yesh omrim, there are those that say, Shesukkah shehi mesucheches kehilchasa. If you have a sukkah that has proper schach, so you have a sukkah that has plenty of kosher, schach is tzilasa meruba mechamasa, v'yorei shemayivash haschach. Problem is, you made your schach, let's say, out of willow branches. You had a weeping willow in your backyard. You cut a bunch of willow branches off of your weeping willow tree, and you threw them on top of the sukkah for schach. Beautiful. It's tzameach min ha'adama. It's not royal l'kabel tumah. It's perfectly kosher as schach. It might even look nice. It might even smell nice. So you put a nice heavy layer of willow branches on top of your sukkah. You look up, you have tzilasa meruba mechamasa. You seem to have a beautiful kosher sukkah. But there's a problem. The problem is that the willow branches will dry out very quickly in the sun. And when they dry up, what's going to happen? The leaves are going to shrivel and the leaves are going to fall off. When the leaves shrivel and fall off, Now you might not have tzilasa meruba mechamasa anymore. Now your sukkah might be chamasa meruba mitzilasa. If you lose all the leaves, you might not have kosher schach anymore. Oh, so the Mechaber says, this is another way to understand the Mishnah. What does the Mishnah say? The Mishnah says, Peres aleh sadin mipnei achama. You spread out a sheet on top of the sukkah because of the sun. According to Rashi, we learned that because of the sun means you wanted to protect yourself from the sun. So you put up the schach for tzeil. That's why you put the sheet on. You put up the sheet l'shem tzeil. Said Rashi, that's a problem. The Rabbeinu Tam is understanding the Mishnah differently. The Rabbeinu Tam is understanding the Mishnah, Pires aleh sadid mipnei hachama. You spread out a sheet on top of the schach, mipnei hachama, because of the sun. What are you worried about because of the sun? So let's see the Mechaber here on the top line of Tzadik Aleph Amud Aleph. You put up your schach, you have tzilasa meruba mechamasa, but the problem is, v'yarei, you're afraid, shema yivash haschach, maybe the schach will dry out in the sun. That's what it means, mipnei achama. You put out a sheet on top of the sukkah, mipnei achama, because of the sun, because you're worried that your schach might dry out because of the sun. Or yishru ha'alin, or the leaves might fall off. The or is a little funny. You put up the sheet, mipnei achama, because of the sun, because you're afraid the sun is going to dry out the schach, and the leaves are going to fall off. Or yishru ha'alin. And then v'tiyeh chamasa beruba mitzilasa, and that's going to ruin your schach to the extent that your sukkah is not going to be kosher because it's going to be chamasa meruba mitzilasa. You're going to have more sunlight than shade, and therefore uperas aleh sadin. So you spread out a sheet shelo tisyavesh, so that it should not dry out. Oitachteh shelo yishru ha'olin, or you put the sheet underneath. Because you said, you know what, the sun is going to dry out the leaves and they're going to fall. I don't want them falling in my soup, so you put the sheet underneath. In either case, not only I don't want them falling in my soup, I put the sheet underneath because I figured the sun will dry out the leaves will taka fall off, but I'll still have kosher schach because the sheet is going to hold the leaves up. Even though the leaves are falling off of the willow branches, they'll still be here on the schach because the sheet is going to trap them. Now, the Rabbeinu Tam says, in this case, what is the sheet doing? The sheet is actually maintaining the integrity of the schach. Says the Mechaber, since in this case, the sheet, the sadin, is actually what is maintaining the integrity of the schach. Without the sadin, you wouldn't have kosher schach here at all. Without the sadin, the sun would dry out your willow branches, the sun would dry out your schach would fall apart, and guess what would happen? You would have chamasa meruba mitzilasa, and you would no longer have a kosher sukkah. So says the Mechaber, kevan sha'asadin goyrim she'al yada tzilasa meruba mechamasa. Since in this case it's actually the sadin that's making you a kosher sukkah, psula. Now the sukkah is puzzle. So here we have the Rabbeinu Tam. What Rashi said was, what is it that makes the sukkah puzzle? How does the sadin make the sukkah puzzle? The sadin makes the sukkah puzzle because the sadin is the schach. You put up the sadin for schach purposes. You put it up to shelter you. So Rashi said that makes the sukkah puzzle. The Rabbeinu Tam is saying a little differently. The Rabbeinu Tam is saying, in his understanding of the Mishnah, the reason you put up the sadin is because the sadin is what maintains the integrity of the schach. Without the sadin, the schach would fall apart, and you would not have tzilasa meruba mechamasa. You would have chamasa meruba mitzilasa. That's why the sukkah is puzzle. The sukkah is puzzle is because the sadin is what's maintaining the schach. The sadin is actually making the schach. Now, a big difference between the Rabbeinu Tam and Rashi. Let's see the Mechaber further. Aval, however, im loi kivein beprisas hasadin, Ela lahagein mipnei achama v'ha'olin oilin oisa. But if the reason you put up the sadin is to protect yourself from the sun, you put it up for shade, or you put it up to protect yourself from falling leaves, or you put it up for noisukkah, for decorative purposes, in all of those cases, according to the Rabbeinu Tam, kshera. In all of those cases, according to the Rabbeinu Tam, the sukkah is kosher. So critical difference between Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. According to Rashi, you put up the sheet to protect yourself from the sun or to protect yourself from falling leaves, the sukkah is pasul, because that means that you put up the sheet for schach purposes. So it's a pasul of sukkah. According to the Rabbeinu Tam says no. You put up a sheet for protection from the sun, you put up a sheet for protection from falling leaves, the sukkah is still kosher. The only time it's pasul is if you put up the sheet in order to maintain the integrity of the schach. Then the sheet is an integral part of the schach, and it's schach pasul, so the sukkah is pasul. But you put it up to protect yourself from the sun, you put it up to protect yourself from falling leaves, then the sukkah is kosher. Now, let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah and see what he says in explanation of the Rabbeinu Tam. Bottom of Tzadik Amid Beis in the Mishnah Berurah is Katan Nun Hey. V'yeshayrim shesukkah deyazu pliga demeikara. This opinion argues on the first opinion that we learned in the previous shiur. Usvir Allah, and this opinion of the Rabbeinu Tam, they hold Damadi Isa Mishnah. This that it says in the Mishnah, Peres aleh sadin mipnei achama, where it talks about you spread a sheet over the sukkah because of the sun. Hainu ba'oifet shetzir lekamei dafka. That's referring to the case that the Mechaber himself discusses, where he says that because of the sun means because you are afraid that the sun is going to shrivel up the schach and destroy the schach, and you won't have tzilasa meruba mechamasa. But if you put up the sheet to give you shade from the sun or to protect you from falling leaves, kshera, then the sukkah is kosher. Afilu leishev tachtov. You can even sit under that sheet and you can eat. The bottle hu legabe sukkah, because it's still bottle to the sukkah. Let's see how it's cutting in vav. Avalim loy kivein. Pirish. Im haisam sucheches yafe. If you had plenty of schach on the sukkah, so you had no question that the sun might destroy the schach. And you didn't have a need for this sheet, only to give you shade from the sun, or to protect you from falling leaves, then the sukkah is kosher. Now the rationale of the Rabbeinu Tam, according to the Achronim, it seems to be that the Rabbeinu Tam is reasoning like this. If the sheet was put there to maintain the integrity of the schach, then, like I said, it's an integral part of the schach. So your schach is schach pasul. If your schach is schach pasul, your sukkah is pasul. But if you had a perfectly kosher sukkah, so you had a sukkah with perfectly good schach, plenty of it, tzilasa meruba mechamasa, and it's not going to fall apart. It's going to be there for the whole sukkah without a problem. And now you took a sheet and you put a sheet on top of it to protect yourself from the sun. According to the Rabbeinu Tam, that's an accessory to the schach. The same way, according to Rashi, no sukkah is an accessory to the schach. In both cases, both according to Rashi, according to Rabbeinu Tam, the fact is that you have a sheet, which is pasul or sukkah, interposed either between you and the schach or between the schach and the sky. Either way, you have a sheet, which is pasul or schach, over the sukkah, right? Rashi says that if you put it there for noise sukkah, if you put it there for decorative purposes, then it's bottled to the schach. Okay, the Rabbeinu Tam says, if you put it up to protect yourself from the sun, it's also bottled to the schach. Why? Because it's also an accessory. I had a sukkah with perfectly good schach. And not only that, it was tzilasa meruba mechamasa. I have a shady sukkah. It's roiv tzeil, it's roiv shade. You want a little more shade. So I threw an accessory shade cover on top of the schach. So that's also an accessory. So it's still bottled to the schach, and it's kosher. Now, let's go a little bit weiter. So first, the Mechaber throws in a caveat, 3 lines down near the end of the line. Ubelvad, the caveat over here is, you want the sheet to be kosher, ubelvad shiur b'soich arba'ah l'schach. The sheet has to be within 4 tfachim of the schach, so that it could be bottled to the schach. If it's more than 4 tfachim away from the schach, it cannot be bottled to the schach. Umihu, however, says the Mechaber, lechatchila lo yaseh, even according to this second opinion, even according to the Rabbeinu Tam, who's more makel, lechatchila lo yaseh, lechatchila you should not do this, eli imkeinu nikr lekol, unless it's very obvious to everybody, shemechavein kidei lahagein, that the purpose of the sheet is to provide you shade from the sun or protection from falling leaves. So again, according to the Rabbeinu Tam, in those cases, if the sheet is there for protection from the sun or for protection from falling leaves, the sukkah is kosher because it's an accessory to the schach. But the Mechaber is saying, even according to the Rabbeinu Tam, lechatchila you should not do this unless it's going to be clear to everybody that that's the purpose of the sheet. Otherwise, people are going to walk by your sukkah and they're going to think that it's okay to be mesachech your sukkah with pasal schach. Someone's going to walk down the street and see that you have a tarp over your sukkah. They say, oh, okay, you're allowed to use a tarp as the schach for your sukkah. No, you're not. That's royal kabel tumah, it's pasal schach. So it has to be obvious why you're doing it. Or, and this is why I mentioned the difference between the Mordechai and the other pshat in Rashi at the beginning of the shiur, or if you have a beged, or like the case I used, you have the drapes from the dining room that are soaking wet, sha'az nikr l'koil, then it's obvious to anybody she'ein shoitchei sham ela liyavish. If somebody sees that you spread out soaking wet drapes on top of your sukkah, they're going to understand that the reason you put it there is for drying purposes. Now, if you put it there for drying purposes, according to the Rabbeinu Tam, that's kosher. Because I put it there for drying purposes, why should it be? Why should it passel my sukkah? According to the Rabbeinu Tam, according to the Rabbeinu Tam, it only passels the sukkah if it's an integral part of the schach because it's maintaining the kashrus of the schach. But if I had a perfectly kosher sukkah and I just spread out the dining room drapes on top to dry them, so okay, it's within 4 tfachim of the schach, it's bottled to the schach, it's okay. So if it's nikr l'koil, that's why it's there. According to the Rabbeinu Tam, it would be okay. According to the Mordechai's pshat in Rashi, that in order for the sukkah to be kosher, whatever you put there has to be bottled to the schach. In order for it to be bottled to the schach, it has to be an accessory to the schach. So then the drapes that are drying on top of the schach are not an accessory to the schach. So they're not bottled to the schach, and the sukkah is puzzled. According to the other understanding of Rashi, that the only time it puzzles the sukkah is if you put it up l'shem schach, you put it up for shelter purposes. Well, then I didn't put the dining room drapes on top for shelter purposes, and again, l'chayr the sukkah would be kosher. Says the Mishnah Berurah cut nun zayin. Umil lechatchila lo yaseh. Why? To lo yomru harayim shekavanasai kidei l'sachech. Lechatchila, even according to the day of Shnia, you should not put up a sheet on top of the sukkah unless it's going to be understandable to everybody that you're putting it up there for shade purposes, which according to the Rabbeinu Tam is okay because it's an accessory to the schach. Va'afilu shaloi b'shas achila aser. This would be also even when you're not actually using the sukkah. To yomru shamanicha sham gam b'shas achila. As kat nun chesh mechavin kidei lahagein. He says, the Mechaber said that according to Rabbeinu Tam, it has to be obvious to everybody that the reason you put this sheet on top of the sukkah is kidei lahagein, to protect you from the sun. Says the Mishnah Berurah right away what I spoke out. Zeh rak ledas hayesh oimrim shehiskim etchila. Even this is only kosher according to the day of Shnia. Aval l'day rishona, but according to Rashi, af b'ofen zeh aser. Even if you put out the tarp on top of the sukkah to protect yourself from the sun or from the rain, according to Rashi, that's puzzle, because you're putting it up for shelter purposes. So that's schach puzzle. It puzzles the sukkah. V'ayin bebir halacha dekain yesh lahachmer lamaisa. The Biur Halacha says that this is the way we should firzach l'maisa. We should be machmer like Rashi. We should be machmer like the day of Rishayna. V'chein kasav abachu shar achrayim. Now understand that this is totally negeya to our shlaks on our sukkah. You have a perfectly kosher sukkah. You have beautiful bamboo poles, or you have kosher mats, and you have tzilasa meruba mechamasa from schach that's not royal lekabel tuma. You have a perfectly kosher sukkah. Now you unroll a tarp on top of your sukkah to protect yourself from the rain. According to Rashi, according to the Deir Rishayna over here in Sif Yud Tes, according to Rashi, that sukkah is puzzle. Because why are you putting the tarp on top of your sukkah? You're doing it to protect yourself from the elements. Well, that means that you're doing it l'shem tzeil. That means you're doing it for schach. And it's schach puzzle, so the sukkah is puzzle. But according to the Rabbeinu Tam in the Day of Shnia, you're putting it up kidei lahagein. You're unrolling that tarp on top of your sukkah for protection purposes. So it's an accessory to the schach. If it's an accessory to the schach and it's within dalit fakim of the schach, it's bottled to the schach, and the sukkah is essentially kosher. And now says the Mishnah Berurah over here, Umikam makom b'shas hatchak, in pressing circumstances, shalo yachal lechol b'sukkah, where you cannot eat in the sukkah, al yedei ha'olin ha'noishrin l'say chamaychel, because leaves are falling into your soup, ay al yedei gishamim ha'noitvin, or because it's raining in your sukkah, ay al yedei ruach shemechabes ha'neros, or it's a very windy and it's blowing out the neros, and you're going to have to sit and eat in the pitch black. Mutav lifroi sadin tachas aschach b'saycha ba'atfachim. It would be better to spread out a sheet, the Mishnah Berurah says, underneath the schach to protect yourself from the falling leaves, or on top of the schach to protect yourself from the rain. Misha yoichal chutz l'sukkah. That would be better than eating outside of the sukkah. So certainly, Rabbi say, on the first night of Sukkos, when the mitzvah to eat in the sukkah is a mitzvah say daraisa, if chas v'chalila it's pouring outside, on the first night of sukkah you can't eat in the sukkah. If you have a shlak, close the shlak and eat in the sukkah, because according to the Rabbeinu Tam, you could be yaitza. According to Rabbeinu Tam, you unroll the tarp on top of your sukkah kidei lahagein, to protect yourself from the elements. That's kosher. So you would be yaitza according to Rabbeinu Tam. You wouldn't be yaitza according to Rashi, but according to Rabbeinu Tam, you'd be yaitza. Ice cotton nun tes. Oishu shar b'mayim. Or you have the dining room drapes that are soaked in water. Ayin b'bir halacha the lefi mashi eskimo achrayim d'yesh la'achmer kedei rishayna. According to the consensus of the achrayim, that we're makmir like Rashi, like the Deir Rishayna, yesh lizar shelo lifreis afilu liyavesh. You shouldn't spread out the dining room drapes on top of the sukkah even to dry them out, because according to Rashi, according to the Mordechai's pshat in Rashi, it's very nice that you didn't put the dining room drapes up l'shem tzeil, but according to the Mordechai's understanding of Rashi, the soaking wet dining room drapes will still passel the sukkah because they're not an accessory to the sukkah. It wasn't put up for noi sukkah. It's not accessorizing the sukkah. And therefore the drapes that you throw up on top to dry are not bottled to the schach. They're schach passel, and they passel the sukkah. And he closes off, he says, Yesh lizar shlo lifreis afilu liyavesh ela shaloi b'shas achila. You should only do this when you're not actually using the sukkah. So this Sif Yud Tes is a very fascinating Sif, very negeya to us. We'll stop over here. Yitz Hashem. We'll pick up next time with Siman Taf Reish Lamed. I guess it's already Thursday. I should wish everybody a wonderful Shabbos. Everyone have a great Shabbos. The Rebbe Shalom, the schos of limud HaTorah, the Rebbe Shalom should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbe Shalom should send Yeshua Sefuas and Parnasa to all those in need. And we should be zeicher to see the Bias Tzedek B'Meher V'Yameinu. Amen. Be well.